Isaias, welcome to Political Hope.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's start with the first question. What does political hope mean to you?
Ooh, I love this question already. So I think political help looks at some type of preservation of redesigning a new system. So like political help can look at not so much this idea or framework of like wishful thinking, but to me, I think it looks as if it's like continued momentum of actions and goals that have been happening over the last few years. And I think that it's very hard when you work in large systemic forces and governmental forces to see that change. But I think that political hope to me really lies within grassroots and local governments because that's where I feel like I've seen the most progress and real hope come through that line.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because you say local grassroots, and that term has been completely like
Yeah.
jobbled up and whatever. But as an environmentalist, I feel when you say local, like that's also how in like ecosystems like thrive is by focusing on local issues and thriving. So maybe is there any context you have as an environmentalist? How do we bring that into the political space?
Yeah, well, I think that, when you look at grassroots movements, which is like, frontline environmental justice organizations, for example, you'll see that most of their employee base is less than 10, but yet they have the heaviest impact in terms of holding polluters accountable. And I think that when it comes to local change, the reason why there's so much more progress towards that is that I think that there's some preservation of people really wanting to work through things despite political differences. And I think that, in terms of like the whole word itself and how it's become convoluted, is I think that the large systemic forces are not so much community centric, but rather money centric. And the reason why I say it's money centric is that a lot of political lobbying groups fund these politicians these days. And so I think the needs of them being local in the beginning when they first started their political career has transmuted itself into this behemoth of feeding the belly of the beast, which is the monstrous creature of themselves of having to constantly fundraise. And so I think then that becomes then a huge power move for corporations and lobbyists to be able to decide the future of our livelihoods because of 100 shareholders versus the community collective of thousands of people living in a poor income community.
Yeah, I mean it's funny how like still there's like this group think, right? Like I mean I've seen so many people, I've even interviewed somebody on this podcast who was running for Congress in Texas, and she was making really big moves, and she was actually like gonna like actually flip her district right towards and
Wow.
she was like really she was for the farmer, she was for environmentalism. I mean, this is in Texas, right, in a part of Texas super red, and she was converting it, and then the Democratic Party came in and there was like, no, we want you to do things our way, and then she ends up losing the thing, right? And so it's like weird how like even if you're in these systems and you're doing it the right way and you're grassroots and you're talking to people and you're connecting, and then the bigger organizations come in and they mess things up and they corrupt it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's where we kind of have to examine both political parties that both should be valid, critiqued, right now today more than ever before. Like me being critical of the Democratic Party doesn't mean I hate them, but I think they need to be able to sit down and accept that critique. And I think now it's become this realm for young people that anyone who criticizes the Biden Harris administration or anyone who criticizes the Democratic Party are instantly seen as a traitor. And I think that's where we kind of have modeled the same behavior of Republican parties where we used to make fun of them for other Republicans canceling each other, but now we're doing that on the Democratic side because we don't support the ongoing bombings happening geopolitically. We don't support the fact that Democrats are valuing corporations over communities. And that itself is that one is better at masking the rhetoric and the other one will say the reality. And that's how it is today.
Yeah, and the flip side of it I see is, your generation. I mean, I try to fit in there as much as I can, but the white
Yeah,
hairs,
of course.
make it hard. Um,
Same here.
but it's I feel it's an interesting moment right now. Most societies go where the youth go, right? And right now is a really interesting moment because there is a little bit of an ownership of like, do you guys want a future? Like, do you want a future where there's food and there's safety and you could travel and there's health and there's You know, and it's like, so right now we actually have to make a decision, a choice of where do we want to go? And what do you feel about that? Especially because you're in the education space and you want to make this education accessible. How do you feel about the possibilities if the youth are educated and young adults are educated to be empowered?
Yeah, I think, well, the youth movement itself is like a conglomerate of ancestral experiences, because I think that, you know, back then, decades ago, there was what you would say like a future livable planet. Like there were still opportunities, but yet there was a legacy of oppression that still exists. I mean, it still exists today, but I think even now more is that we've seen the rise of celebrating billionaires, and then the rise of even celebrating a trillionaire soon to be. And I think that's where it's insane, where it's like, how do we get to this point where we humanize corporations over people, which has scared me. And I think younger generations obviously are living in a reality where a lot of us don't trust our neighbors. We live in a loneliness epidemic. We don't see a future for our career. We don't see a future for bills. We don't see a future for these things. And so realistically, we've been disempowered already because older people have decided to defund the system. So when I was a young teenager, almost like what, like 10 years ago, I was 17, like, they were already starting to defund programs in schools. What makes you think 3 to 4, 5+ years from then, the next kid that's growing up in that same experience will be having less attention, less resources given to them? And all because of what? Because we want to give our higher salaries to these people who don't give a F. And then we have obviously them trying to cater to older donors that will give them money. So it's like they're trying to sustain their livelihoods and also their older people's livelihoods. And they say, well, the youth, they can work through it and they can get over it. But it's like, that's why people get so uncomfortable when you ask them, probably, how much were you when you bought your first house and how much did it cost? A lot of them get embarrassed by it because they know that that price isn't going to be the same. And they know if they worked out of college right now, they wouldn't be able to afford a house.
Yeah, there is a lot of, reckoning, and it's funny because the paradox is you're not going to take when you die, you're not taking the money with you. So, and and I've actually
Yeah.
worked a lot with a lot of youth whose parents have a lot of money, and get them passing their money to their kids is that doesn't necessarily mean that's health. Like the kids don't appreciate the wealth, right? And it doesn't lead to actually positive results all around in society. Just
Yeah.
handing
I
wealth down.
mean, yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to like, things around like generational wealth or ecological wealth, where I had to reframe myself of like, I no longer want to sustain my species. I need to sustain all multi-species and reframe this idea of what does generational wealth actually mean. And when you look at it, obviously a lot of the origins come from America's new money centric world of the American dream, the Great Gatsby that helped popularize it, the industrialized systems. And when I talk about ecological wealth, I'm just like, what is the true value of species? Because in generational wealth or the dominant economic system, what is seen as valuable or rich is what is economically good and profit for the people. But what is not seen as rich is species that are symbiotic to those landscapes that help nurture and preserve resources, but because they have zero monetary value, they're seen as irrelevant. And so I think for me, like having to come about of growing an immigrant family, having this idea of generational wealth and just thinking, I don't want to just save my family. I
Yeah.
want to save like communities because that's what we should be doing. And I think as young people, we have so much pressure to save communities when we know billionaires and millionaires have so much to alleviate that suffering, but they won't give that up.
No, not that easily. And that actually brings me to this, man. I feel that would be a good next video or a future video is on ecological wealth because it really
Yeah.
goes back also to like indigenous communities and all of our, even if you hang out with kids long enough, right? Kids who are open-hearted
Yeah.
and they're free, you'll notice that, there's automatically a understanding and a value of the life of plants and the life
Yeah.
of fungi and like a relationship. I'm like, oh, hi, how's it going, Crow? And how's it going? Like you actually like value the lives of all these beings. That feels very natural and organic. It's like almost taken away
Exactly.
where like we either like separate ourselves from nature or we look at nature as something extractable, right?
Exactly. And I think that giving honor to indigenous communities that we're able to always redefine what the true value of systems are worth, of the living and non-living, is something that's beyond the Western imagination, even my imagination growing up in the Western world. And I think that's what really frustrates people, is that people think it's conceptually or spiritual, but in fact, it's not. It's a technicality. It's actually, in reality, it's the way that indigenous communities have lived, and that's the proof of concept that it's a real thing. But I think Western mindsets are very, I mean, my own mindset, we're like constrained of like, what does that actually look like in practice? It's like, well, of course, within capitalism now, it's convoluted. It's not that it's not straightforward, but it's not so much easier for the general person who may have been indoctrinated by these systems to understand that.
Yeah, and as you're saying this too, I'm also thinking about like all the people out there who I know who are environmentalists or trying to be environmentalists that are still trying to quantify nature, right? They're like, we need to get this carbon offset of this percentage and this, they're like trying to quantify a tree and the value of a tree. It's like, you guys, there's way more. You can't, it's impossible to quantify nature in that way. Like we can't, I don't think we're supposed to,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the models of those systems, so I took a lot of forestry and fishery courses in undergrad. And to be honest, the way that they teach you is very absurd. Like the models they use is quote unquote sustainable yield models. So it's like an equation that uses calculus, of course, and species richness. But it's basically saying that this is the most sustainable amount that you can harvest without recognizing, okay, but if you're doing it sustainably to get a large portion of a population, who's to say you're not destroying the other species that are around there? And there's no measurement to that. You just assume that everyone takes the time to make sure that everything's protected and safe. But in my view, I'm like, I don't. That doesn't make sense to me. But okay.
I mean, it goes to this to the notion, I think you've spoken about this a few times, but like the notion of conservation and sustainability and how those are kind
Yeah.
of like they're like put a band-aid, like not even put a like not even put a band-aid, a decent band. It's like a band-aid that comes off like after like a couple of minutes, versus like what language can we use, right? Like, regeneration is something that's used, but that's also starting to be captured, right? Like
Yeah.
how can we like create a movement that sustains?
Yeah, I mean, I think when creating movements that sustain is it's really hard. I mean, I think that the easiest thing that we could usually say is we come together and we try to romanticize collectivism when we know a lot of us that are marginalized people have either been indoctrinated or nurtured into collectivism. And obviously, like, I don't want to paint this whole narrative of like, because for a lot of immigrant families, you grow up sometimes, some of us grow up with this like collectivism mindset. It's like you have to sacrifice everything of your livelihood and identity for the greater good of your family. And sometimes that's dangerous. You need to have that balance of individuality and community to thrive. But I think that things that I really have seen really been more successful has always been cooperative models. Whether you look at a business or you look at housing structures. So in college, I lived in a cooperative
Oh, you
housing
did? Cool.
with 140 people. Yeah. So I always tell people in college, like I had that hippie lifestyle the last 2 years of my college. It was also affordable rent. And also everyone did 5 hours weeks of chores and we all got meals Monday through Saturday. So like, for me to be able to see cooperative models, I don't want to say it's an escapism, but I did want to say that it's a way for us to kind of redesign nurturing systems for ourselves. But I think for young people today, our biggest thing is all of us feel disconnected.
Yeah.
We don't feel like we talk about falling in love, we talk about meeting friends, we talk about getting business jobs. I think a lot of us are just so deeply like disengaged from that now. Even myself, where I'm like, I don't even know if the next person I follow on Instagram that wants me to follow them, if that's the last time I'll see them. And it's kind of like this thing where we become so used to transient points in our life.
Yeah, it kind of is a good segue to, one of the things I attended of yours was an urban ecology walk, right? And where we went out
Yeah.
for a walk and there was a little bit of us, learning about the LA River and the history of it. It was really cool, right? But it goes back to like the saying of like us coming together in person, and you brought everybody together to learn about the LA River. But when we talk about cooperation, right? Like we also can serve the river, right, too, together. And like that the bonding that happens when we are in like cooperation towards something greater than ourselves is so potent. So I wonder, if that's a potentially like a next step for our environmentalism is to come together more in celebration, but also in some sort of pro-activism, right? Not just like activism of like us, like, hey, like shut down the fossil fuels, but like how can we actually be proactive about the climate?
Yeah, I think can you repeat that question again? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, really, the question is like, how can we be more proactive about the climate? Because I mean, there's a lot of anxiety, right? And I get it. I'm not even young, and as a young person, I would imagine even more stress. But we don't really have many. There's not many pathways towards proactivism, right? So, like, what do you feel about that? Like, how can we transition to a point where we're like, rather than being victims of what's happening, how can we start to become I don't know what the word, well, I don't even know if the word is there, right? Like activist is not even the right word.
I mean, I think for me, there's different theories of change that exist out there. There will always be different people who think differently, and I think it's great to have that. We need to have that because I think there's people that are needed for direct action, front lines. We need to be supporting them constantly and have that active mindset for sure. But I think on my end, something that has been really made me feel like nurtured and like be able to continue this work for decades is building outside of those dominant spaces. So it's true that we should validate being victims and we should validate our oppression and that we should continue carrying that as a moment of torch. And I think that yes, it's true. We can sit on that traumatized narrative, or we can look back and be like, yeah, that was shitty, but now I'm doing something better. And I've found that building outside of spaces that usually did not center a lot of environments of color, like building my own events and summits, has been a way for me to reconnect and kind of come back together of like, wow, I wish I had this when I was younger in undergrad because it was such a struggle to even connect with people. Or wow, we're building outside of these dominant white environmental spaces who often don't give an F about Black and brown people of color, but now they want to be a part of this summit. So now it's kind of like it's not so much taking back power from them, it's building power and recognizing that the power they had can be lost today. And dynamics change. Last like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I was on social media and people made fun of me of like my 1,000 followers, but now those same people are asking me how I made this into my career. Dynamics change, and I think that it's so important to know that like if you carry yourself with grace and humility, while also understand that we're humans, like there's moments I get mad, moments I can be petty. I'm gonna validate all those human body behaviors and notice that like there is possibilities for a lot of people to really transmute themselves into a higher power level of love that even exists beyond death. And I think that's what has helped me to just be like, okay, I'm doing this work for myself, my community, and it's not going to sit well with others. It will sit well with it will sit great for other people. Other people will use it. That's what matters, and that's what helps me kind of stay grounded because I know not everyone's going to do the same thing that I want to do in life.
No, definitely. And that, yeah, what you said is kind of also brings me back to something I noticed on one, I think it was one of your videos or something where an academic was like calling you out for like not like citing him. And then I don't know if you remember that, but, but it's like, but I've also experienced stuff like that where there's like a little bit of, like you're doing this really important work, but people come out of nowhere and they don't like, they only look at a small window and they don't look at the whole thing. And it's, what you're doing, Isaias, is like you're putting a lot of weight on your shoulder, right? You're like exposing
Yeah.
yourself out in the world. You're trying to educate, but also you're trying your best to also honor people who you're learning from, but it's almost like an impossible task. So I'm like, what advice or
Yeah.
what I mean, I feel like you tackle that situation appropriately, but like if for other people out there who are getting attacked or whether it's by academics or whatever, like what is your advice for anybody who's exposing themselves in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think stand your ground is the best thing you do. Like as an academic scholar, I don't believe in obviously copy and pasting people's words. I believe in accrediting them, but when academics are saying you didn't quote me in this lifestyle photo of your friends at the symbiosine, it's like, I'm sorry, but you didn't weren't the photographer. We are recapping our event, and our event and blog that I've written already accredited to you, and you've been accredited the event. So you not wanting to have your like this academic scholar having his own friends comment and say that, and it's like when he got called out or called in, I would say, then he realized he shouldn't have done that. but the comments were still there.
Yeah.
It's live, and it's in my view a secondhand embarrassment for the academic,
Yeah.
because we could have emailed if he had an issue. We could have set up a call, but even then on the blog, he apologized and still expresses frustrations of not that it's a word that he's taken years to coin. And I said, it is true. No one is claiming that you didn't coin it. I've said in all my interviews and press that these words were directly coined by you, but you don't own IP or exclusive rights over event series. If
Yeah.
you wanted to coin words that actually help society, then you wouldn't be so focused on that. And I think
Exactly.
that's and I think that, of course, I don't think he liked that response. And I know I had to put that boundary, but I think for a lot of people who are constantly interrogated and questioned by white academic scholars, is that we need to understand where power knowledge system structures come from. And a lot of them, honestly, in the ways that our Western mentality has been indoctrinated by academia, is to use research as resource acquisition, to
Yes.
use it to dispossess someone's local knowledge, to use it to claim superiority, to claim offense over that knowledge system. And I think for me, as an educator, I'm more focused and grounded on open access,
Hmm.
while acknowledging that there are limitations that need to be met of citations, of sources, of where you coming from. And I come from a more cultural analysis part of my work where I expand those dimensions of what's being talked about. And I think for scholars, they may get mad because that's what they feel like they wanted to say, but just didn't have the right words. But again, all educators come from someone else. We've been all taught by a teacher that we then eventually build on top of, or we grow out of. So I think that in the situation I had with this embodied, it was very disappointing, because I have quoted this person so many times in my work. I've looked up to them, and for an IG post that was a flyer or a lifestyle photo that didn't even talk about symbiosis much, to be saying that you didn't quote me on this specific post was just seen like, I'm sorry, but if you've seen the first time I ever introduced the term in 2019 or 2020, said your name in the first line. So there's to me, there was no way that I could have forgotten to cite you. And I think it was just this idea that older academics at times don't understand citations on social media. But if anything, his work is being popularized through me.
It's I think there's a few things happening. There's probably like a sense of ego, right? Like, and when when somebody's ego is hurt, they completely like put on like blinders, right? For any
Yeah.
possible routes of peace, right? And so it's just like something is wrong. But I think also we're kind of in this weird place where like the older generations, they're struggling with letting like passing the baton forward, right? Like they want to be the heroes of what's happening in the world. And I attend a lot of regenerative economics, a lot of spaces where they're trying to like reimagine economics and reimagine finance, reimagining regenerative farming and all this stuff, but it's still being controlled by the same like older white men, right? They're the ones still holding all the things, and they don't. It's like they literally can't hand. They can't even conceive that somebody else can take leadership other than them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the same when you look at environmental movements, is that why is it that majority of the white male environmentalists or climate scientists don't help other men nor mentor? Because we have an issue with toxic masculinity and misogyny. And it's like they don't want to help us. I've met them. They're not really, they'll mentor other women
Right.
that are younger than me or my age, but they won't have that conversation from a man to man of like, what are we doing to actually build real equity in this space?
That's a great, I never thought about that, but that's such a good point. I've seen a lot of like even hiring women in their organizations. Like there'll be like a guy, I think one of the organizations, I'll call them out, they call it Farmers Footprint, but they have all these women working underneath them. And they're like, yeah, we like love the women, but then none of the women have any power to make any
Yeah.
decision.
I mean, look at John Kerry. He'll grab his Global South woman activists, young activists with them, take photos with them. But God forbid he'll be with another man that will probably challenge him to deconstruct that power dynamic, because it's good press for him. There's no competition for him because, again, that's another thing where patriarchy exists. But that's just like a clear example where it's like none of the male climate scientists and people have ever extended themselves for mentorship to me. All of them have either seen me as a threat or internalized homophobia that's flexed upon their dynamics. And
Mm.
I'm proud to say that I'm so glad I'm mentored by majority of women, non-binary, and trans folks, because they're the ones who have gotten me and the ones who are literally on the top on doing real change, not the men, to be honest.
Yeah,
Not
you know,
all men, yeah.
and I really love this term. Did you coin this term, petromasculinity?
No, that's Kara Daggett. It's
Heretic.
listed on the first paragraph. Yeah,
It's right there, right? Yeah, see it. So,
yeah.
you know, I mean, I feel like this at the core of it, like this idea is kind of what's fueling, pun intended, is fueling, you know, like why a lot of the men who are currently have power, currently have resources, currently are in places of, you know, decision making spaces, why they struggle with what we're talking about, like be on the hand over the baton, because it's almost like, you know, their house of cards has been built on, you know, if they're successful right now, like somewhere they compromised their values. So
Mhm.
can they allow somebody who has values to go past them? Like it's like a block. Is it even possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we kind of see the race of billionaires, for example. Majority of them are men. And, I think it's maybe not internal competition who can be the richest, but maybe for them it is. I don't know. But I would say that, it's interesting to kind of see the dynamics of masculinity and identity being enforced from accolades, for example. Like I don't want to become an accolade activist. I don't even want to get an award. The awards are what, plastic and cheap, like, or whatever they're
Straight
made out
up.
of. Like why do we need them? Give me food instead of an award. I will eat food rather than an award any day.
That's giving me a good idea. Maybe Cosmic Labyrinth can start giving like seed awards, you know, like here's some seeds and you
Yeah.
can plant the seeds or something like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You know, the accolades and the awards is kind of like a trick. Like it almost feels like there's almost like this trick of, you know, here, let's award this person who's doing this stuff, but like let's not change the patterns or the structure or the ethos, right? It's
Yeah,
performative.
exactly.
So I got a question. You know, you have so you know, queer brown vegan is your is the brand or the message. I'm curious, you know, Isaias, what is like the optimum for what you're doing? Like let's say things start kicking up, and obviously you're getting more support now, and you're getting support from sponsors and brands, and there's more momentum happening, and also, you know, LA jurisdiction stuff. I mean, you're starting to actually make moves within the city as well. What is the hope for what you're doing? Like, what's the possibility? Like, what are the ripple effects, both for yourself, but also for the community? Like, what are you envisioning that happens from Queer Brown Vegan?
Yeah, so I created QueerBrownVegan in 2019 on just a mission to make environmental education accessible. But I realized that, my passion for media education, environmentalism, and storytelling was a possible outlet to explore through there. And I was able to do a lot of infographics at first, then going into long form media to produce stories where, getting those real experts and then coming to have community-led events that brought local government people together. But I think that one of the things I recognize is that, the work is always transcending. Like I'm always evolving. I always say that maybe one day QueerBrownVegan will no longer exist, and I'm just Isaias Hernandez. I'm just the creative that created that account, and that was what I was known for at the time when I was younger. But one of the things that I see myself doing is actually, and this is not talked about yet, but will be very soon, is that I'm planning to release and work on a nonprofit soon called the Ecological Wealth Institute. And one of the reasons why is that, a nonprofit industrial complex has its own issues, obviously. But I know that for me, if I want to create more larger scale impact, such as like actually helping young creatives get into different industries from education, technology, fashion, food, I have all those connections from a brand experience to help create mentorship programs or fellowship programs to get young people to not just start thinking about where they want to be, but to create a well-being world. And that's been a very hard thing to do as an influencer and as a creator, is that I've hit a lot of walls for funding because I'm not a 501c3. And I think that I can have so much more larger impact of, I'm just not a youth climate org. It's just a well-being org. And that's the thing where I think I'm going to have to differentiate myself in this space, is that of course there's things that, you have to do things to scale. You have to think about other people. And I think for me, like with creating the Ecological Wealth Institute, I really hope that it's able to create systemic policy change, in which I was not really able to do much as an influencer account, only promote certain laws, but also to just really extend the programs and services to people globally, and specifically in the United States, because that's where my work is based. But I have felt that for the longest, a lot of people have always asked me why I haven't created a nonprofit. I think it's just because I had this identity complex relationship of, oh, I don't think I deserve to be in the nonprofit space. But the more and more I've seen how nonprofits work, and some of them are very exploitative and don't even do any impact work and given thousands of dollars, I said I have to do something in my lifetime to help others, because again, I was that 21-year-old out of college that didn't know what I wanted to do. And I got rejected from all the environmental nonprofits, and I felt like a failure out of college. And luckily got a job instantly at a creative agency. But, I felt that I never want to put other people in that same situation that I went through. And just to be like, I know it's not the final destination to work here, but it's a stepping stone to your career. And that's how I've always seen it. Even the people that work with me, it's like, it's a stepping stone. I don't expect you to be here for decades. If you want to, that's awesome. I'd love to, but it's something that I want people to build true wealth for themselves outside of what we see as work and things like that.
I love that. Yeah, and even I want to extend the invitation. We Cosmic Labyrinth is going to be doing a lot of really cool events during San Francisco Climate Week, which is happening at the end of
Oh,
April
cool.
for a week.
Yeah.
And one of the events we're hosting is about regenerative economics, a panel, a huddle. So if you want to come up there and talk about the potential of this, and you never know, you might get potential donors or people who come and join, or maybe young youth, youth ecological activists, right? Who also might show up. So I just want to extend that. I'm just that, as you were sharing that, I'm like, yeah, that's part of how we want to reimagine economics, right? Like, how can we
Yeah.
start to include these kind of organizations? And I even imagine, as you're saying, how would you like what would you include in some sort of like ecological wealth like institute? What kind of wealth are you imagining in that space? Ecological wealth, like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're still in the early days of obviously clarifying our mission, but I think for us, we're really focused on one, educational models, so curriculum-based models that are culturally correspondent, based with academic institutions or
Nice.
even grassroots collectives. The second thing is through an economic lens, but through an industry lens.
Mhm.
So a lot of companies right now struggle with getting new talent that are actually invested in sustainability. And many people that do environmental work think that NGOs are the only environmental jobs you can get, when a lot of for-profits exist. And I've met a lot of those businesses that recognize like they're small businesses, but it's a very tricky system to work in, and that they're trying their best to create a well-being world. And so for me, I've always said, why don't we create fellowship programs from different sectors in climate, from food, fashion, farming, technology, education, and really all and economics, right? Offer those programs through that. So creating that not that mentorship, but that fellowship pipeline program. And then the last thing for us is event activations. Is that how does the Ecological Wealth Institute actually not just focus of we are the only ones trying to redesign an economy or a well-being world, because we're not. There's the Well-Being Economic Alliance, which I love. There is the Circular Economic Institute, I believe. We are not so much a focus of like redesigning the economy. We're more about redesigning well-being of society. So for us, we take this very spiritual grounded route of through event activations. How do we partner with other nonprofit partners to create true long impactful events and programming, whether that's through conversations around environmental justice and housing, environmental justice in fashion? How do we really conglomerate all of these experiences and bring different people to the table on that end to hopefully in the future, I would love to do this once we have more funding, is to create the first ever Ecological Wealth Summit. That's a 2-3 day summit that brings a lot of unique people out there. But through my experience of doing a lot of event programming myself and my team who has been there for me with years, we really think that we can do that. But obviously we're still in the early stages. Obviously nothing is set yet, but this is probably the first time I'm talking about it, because I felt that for the longest time I was struggling of what I call a nonprofit, and I just was like, easy because that's really true to who I want to be doing.
Well, I'm grateful that you shared it here and you felt call and it came out of your heart that and it
Yeah.
is, sometimes we have to speak things into truth and it being. And I think a lot of people are going to be advocates of this. I even know in the regenerative economic spaces that I'm kind of playing around in, they're trying to support initiatives like this, but they don't even know where to support, right? So it's great that you guys are conceiving this because there's people thinking about how to support things like this, but they don't know those things are not even crystallized, right? So like you crystallizing something
Mhm.
will offer an opportunity for people to pass the baton forward. And also, by the way, Ecological Wealth Institute makes iwi. So I don't know. I just like
Iwi, yeah, EWI, Iwi, yeah. It's unique, right? EWI or Iwi, like it's just cute. But also I feel like from a branding marketing perspective, I think it draws people
yeah.
to like they're like, wait, and they'll like they I don't know. I felt that a lot of the times when I call about ecological well, people sit down and they're like, tell me more. I'm like, it's not I would say again too, I don't want to say I coined it, but like it's not a new like it's used as ecological economics in other
I've
texts
seen
and
that.
stuff like that. But I guess the way I kind of conceptualize it in my own writing and cultural analysis was using the example of generational wealth and
Right.
how I hated using that word because I said it didn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny. The things that trigger us can also liberate us, right? So you
Yeah.
have to kind of go through it, right? So and you answered that more in the like the collective sense, but I'm curious also, Isaiah, you, right? Like what's the glass? I don't even know what the terminology where there's glass floor and there's glass ceiling. Like if you were to break out of the glass ceiling, right? Like what's the most optimum in the next 3 to 4 years? What do you see happening from the work that you're doing for yourself? Like what's happening? How are you moving past
Yeah.
your expectations?
Yeah, I think for myself, I hit a very rough patch last year in my career where I felt things were stagnant and I was thinking, oh my God, like, this is maybe for another artist where you feel creatively blocked.
Hmm.
And the more I thought about growth, the more the thought about these things, the more I started to compare myself, the more I started to feel like, okay, there's obviously like ego, but like also like there's the things that you have to work through. I think for myself, I've always recognized that I'm not someone that will base my work on virality. I
Okay.
think that there's many environmentalists today who will talk about being viral and getting this viral video, but virality is not sustainability. I always think about legacy work. And so for me, I've always thought slow growth is the best way to go versus people are like, I just went viral for this video. And it's like, it's great that they did, not to say that, no hate on them. But I think for me, my trajectory has always been legacy work, is that I am not invested in holding the traditional environmental educational norm anymore, even in my work. It's like we've already defined climate justice. And
Hmm.
if you don't know what it is, you can look at my blog or website. It's already there. I tell people I'm more rooted in just expanding myself outside of those spaces to bring in my true concepts of myself from spirituality, from religious, from food, just different ways of how I've expressed myself in my lifetime. And I think, one of those goals actually is being on TV. Like I've literally been creating my own web series because I recognize that PBS and all these networks that are amazing, they're not going to give me a show. Like who am I? Like, to be honest, like, who am I when I have to ask myself, what are you doing in this industry? And the truth is that I have nothing behind my name unless I produce real stories for
Right.
myself. And it's exclusively owned by me. Like no
Right.
one could ever take away that work anymore. And so I really just want to show people of how, from a grassroots model, how I went into entertainment and media. But I think the second thing, just from an outside career position, is that I do want to have a family and I do want to have a house. Like I mean, I'm not expecting a mansion. I'm just expecting a 2 to 3 bedroom house where have a small backyard garden and I can just like really relax on that end. And also just continue just showing up for younger people that enter this space, because I think right now I get a lot of DMs from young people telling me that they need help and I wish I could help them from my capacity. But I understand too, like it's not an easy thing. And I want to be doing this work for legacy and for decades. And that means that I have to stay active in terms of my mind and my physical health, that I need to show up for people and I will be there. I just know that there's moments in your career, that in your life too, that you doubt yourself. And I think I had that the last year and a half. And it's kind of come to an end where it's like, regardless of what happens, you did everything you can. And right now is the perfect time to do that because I'm young and I don't want to regret that. I'm not saying older people can't do that either, but for me, it's like you know what, I should do this because I'm never going to be 25, 26 again.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's a challenge having having a wise perspective, but being in a young body,
Yeah,
right? Uh,
exactly. Yeah,
So yeah, it's important for you to, make sure you take care of yourself and take care of your mind, body, your spirit. Especially because and also as an academic, you're also aware of all the different things that like actual things that are going on. So you got to take a step away from that and listen to the birds once in a while and listen to the whales once in a while, and get
exactly.
that data informatics, from there. Cool. Well, I mean, beyond that, what are some things that are coming up that people should be, keeping their eye out or their ear out about what you're doing? Or is there any activities or actions that you're going to be doing in the next few months that people can come and jump on?
Yeah, so really cool things I'm working on is I'm releasing more episodes to my Teaching Climate Together web series. Episode 3 should be coming out hopefully
Nice.
soon on critical ecology, looking on slavery in the land,
Cool.
which is a very, very deep conversation that needs to be had within ecological work. But the second thing is actually the Symbiocene, which I co-created with my good friend Kalpana Arias from Nowadays on Earth. We actually are hosting the Symbiocene Summit in London during London Climate Week. We got our venue confirmed. So we are looking for sponsors or we are looking for potential speakers. And we're also just looking for people who would love to help volunteer or even do that. And we may be bringing it to Climate Week NYC. So in the fall. So we are working towards that. But that's really the major announcements that we have that I can release. Other than that, other video projects I'm working on, but they're on the down low right now because I can't speak about it contractually. I'll get sued, but for later, I'll be able to talk more about it.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, I definitely encourage people to watch the Teaching Climate Together web series. I think that's a good thing. It's really smart how that's produced. And I think you even just released something recently about the land back stuff, which I remember
Yeah,
I commented on. And that was cool that a lot of environmentalists don't talk about land back. And that's a really important subject, right?
yeah, and it's blowing up on YouTube now. I mean, it's got more views than the last videos I posted in a lot in some time. But that's really great to see that there is more need for indigenous knowledge to be shared, but also from a non-indigenous educator perspective of like how should we approach these things as myself being non-indigenous on that end.
There's a project in LA where it's a kind of a land back project in East LA, and I'll tune you in. They were asking us to kind of help produce some play shops, elemental play shops on the land. And
Oh
so maybe
wow.
I'll tune you in because it is a land back that's
Yeah,
happening in LA that nobody knows about, but like it'd be great if there was more attention brought to that so they can get more support. But also, like reimagining how like people who live, there's so many people in LA who actually like care, right? They want to support, but they don't know how they can financially support. But there's ways, right? That you could pay like a tax. Like in the Bay Area, there's a
yeah,
Socorro land trust, and people pay a
yeah. Oh
tax,
yeah, that's yeah.
right? And so there's
That's what
ways
was
that we
mentioned in the video. Yeah, that's
see.
yeah.
So,
It was so dope to see that. Honestly.
so we could do that in LA. I mean, there's all these celebrities and there's people who make money. Like it's like just a little portion support the indigenous communities and their relearning of their knowledge and wisdom. And can we also tap into that? Because I would love to go to those schools too. You know, I
Yeah,
want to learn.
exactly.
I want to learn how they talk about ecology and, learn about ecology, right? So awesome. All right, Isaiah, how do you feel? I feel like we hit so many different topics. We, started a nonprofit here, right? I'm just kidding. But
Literally.
is there anything else you want to talk about, or is there anything else or do you feel complete?
I feel so complete. And this has probably been one of my favorite podcast episodes I've been in, where we kind of just focus on just different subjects of matter versus who are you? What did you do? What do you think about this? I feel like we were able to have very impactful spaces. So I really appreciate this space so much. So thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah. And yeah, keep up the great work. And not just me, I'm sure there's people out there too, just to remember that we're in this together. It's a tough
Yeah.
journey because we're going upstream. So, we're going upstream together. So, you're always open to if you need any help or need any support, or as you said, there's a lot of people reaching out to you. How can we start to support more of the youth, right, with what they're feeling? So I just want to open up those portals. I don't even know what that means, right now, but I do hope that we create more spaces of restoration and redemption and reconciliation so that we can all be healthier and more powerful together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, all right. How do I stop?